I want to do a player spotlight. I want to do a deep dive into his season, whether he met expectations, whether he fell short of those. I think we probably are all on the same wavelength. Probably fell a little short of those, but just the positives, right? The pros, the cons to potentially bringing Tee Higgins back for, another run at this thing. I'm really curious to hear what you guys have to say. I'm going to kick this over to Daniel. Let him start us off.
All right, I'm excited for this, and I'm going to start this off going off a little off script with Tee Higgins. I know we're talking about just this year, but the thing with Tee Higgins that really catches my eye, and when we have this discussion, do you bring Tee Higgins back or not? I had to go back and look at the playoff run that the Bengals had when they went to the Super Bowl. I went back and looked at it and was like, okay, how valuable is Tee Higgins really to this team? And I looked at just how well he performed, and even being in person at some of these games, in the First Star Suite, looking at Tee Higgins' value when he's healthy, right? You've got a guy who is a jump ball threat, a guy who is a 50-50 ball guy, and it's not like it's kind of a cop-out in the sense of, hey, if nothing else is working on your offense, if the run game wasn't working, you could just throw the 50-50 ball to Tee Higgins. And in the biggest game of his life, in the biggest moment, Tee Higgins had one hell of a game in the Super Bowl. And I know I'm going back a couple years, but I'm looking at even in the playoffs last year. Last year he had a couple huge games. And the question with Tee Higgins, is about the money, but him as a player, I truly believe he is a top 20 receiver in the National Football League when healthy. I truly believe that he could be a number one on some NFL teams. And when I look at what potential value could he be bringing to the Bengals in the near future, it's allowing, a guy like Jamar Chase to have more one-on-one opportunities. And it's allowing Tee Higgins, he is going to be the guy that has those one-on-one opportunities. The focus will be on Jamar Chase, and Tee Higgins, I truly believe, is the wide receiver to exploit that. Because if it's not Tee Higgins, you're going to rely on a potential free agent guy. You're going to rely on an Andre Yoshivas. You're going to rely on a Rome Odunze potentially if you go with that route in the first round. And Tee Higgins just gives you consistency when he's on the field.
Just looking at like purely the performance on the field he had, he was still 9th out of 61 wide receivers in yards per reception. So he was still offering that downfield threat. He was 13th in yards after the catch per reception, which was a career high for him. So he was able to do that after the catch and help manufacture some yards that this offense definitely desperately needed when Joe Burrow was not healthy, when Jake Browning was still trying to get his footing in. You see a little bit of that inefficiency, right? That just stems not just from Tee Higgins, who ranked 35th out of those 61 in yards per route run. The reason I think that we see those other numbers are so high while the efficiency on a per play basis is so low is because we know the struggles that the Bengals offense had. So I see the struggles of the Bengals offense as the reason that efficiency doesn't really match up with some of the other numbers that have been good. The other part of that obviously is being second in drop percentage, which when you look year to year at the receivers who generally have drop percentages spike, they usually come back down to the average, right? It's just like a quarterback who has a bunch of balls that gets intercepted, but then falls back to his career average, right, after 1 year, or just has a lot of his turnover-worthy plays intercepted. Looking at Tee Higgins, his drop percentage in this season was 12.5%. He was at 4.5 the year prior, 8 the year prior, 6.9 the year prior. So yeah, middle of the pack, but not like out there with 12%. That's almost double a lot of times what he was offering. So, and that was with 120, 140 or 136 targets. Like that's a bigger sample than what you got from this year from an injured T. So I think there's a lot of reasons to expect that a healthy Tee Higgins would perform on field a lot better, as well as a healthy Joe Burrow would help him have more gaudy numbers that we're used to, right? But
if you're in the Bengals shoes, which is probably what the Bengals are going to do, because again, the Bengals overvalue their players. I know we say that all the time. The Bengals and Duke Tobin were right when they said we're not in the business of making other teams better. If you wanted to Higgins, go out and get your own. He said that last year. At the combine.
I'm in the business of making the Cincinnati Bengals better, and so trading Tee Higgins is not on my mind. That's their problem. They want a receiver. Go find your own.
Almost a year till he said that, right?
You're right.
And here we are, and Tee Higgins still doesn't have a deal. So I do believe he meant that statement when he said it. But even though he meant the statement when he said it, doesn't make it necessarily true in the long haul. right? And what I mean by that is you could see a situation in which they franchise Tee Higgins and they're expecting, with a healthy Joe Burrow, with Jamar Chase back in the fold, to go fully in on this Super Bowl run that they're planning for this year. And this year feels like a pivotal year in that, in that run. And I think, I'm approaching this season. I mean, every year you expect your team, if your team has a competitive team, a competitive quarterback, you're expecting your team to take the step forward and try to compete for a championship. But this year feels a little bit different. It feels like this is the last year where you'll have this crop potentially together. And if you're approaching it like the Bengals, I expect Tee Higgins to be franchise tagged. I then expect them to probably he walks the following season. And with that thinking, with that thought process, I think I've started to come around to the idea more of, of him staying in the fold here in Cincinnati, only because we know their thought process and how they
I think they value Tee Higgins on this team this season for a Super Bowl run more than they'd value a second round pick in their mind.
And yes, in the long-term situation, the long-term projection. And I think that when you're thinking about it that way, Tee Higgins here for the Super Bowl run, I think the Bengals are probably approaching it. What's going to make our team the most lethal offensively that it could possibly be? The tight end position is definitely a position that you need to address, obviously. Hopefully in free agency.
Hopefully. Oh man, there's so many tight ends in free agency I would love to have on the team after this year.
Yeah, like Noah Fant.
Any number of them.
Noah Fant
is one of them.
Sure.
Yeah.
So give me some. But my thought process is I think that's where the spotlighting for Tee Higgins comes out, because I think we can all agree, and I think T can agree to this. T didn't have the season that he wanted to have.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult for David Mulgeta, an Athletes First, and Tee Higgins to approach a team and say, hey, we want top wide receiver money when you didn't put up top wide receiver, numbers. I think that this franchise tag could be beneficial for both sides.